In the shadowed halls of Thornfield Manor, a scream pierces the night. Sir Reginald Hawthorne lies dead, a letter opener in his heart, his secrets bleeding onto the page. Who among the glittering guests, his icy wife, his trembling daughter, the charming artist, or the nervous doctor, wields the hand of a killer? Enter Miss Jane Marple, her little gray cells unraveling lies, lipstick stains, and whispered debts. Will she untangle the truth before the murderer strikes again? Dive into Tuesday Night Riddle, Miss Marple Shines, where every clue counts, and the final twist will leave you stunned.
Chapter 1. The Setup. Tuesday, 6 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The late summer sun dipped low, casting golden shadows across the manicured lawns of Thornfield Manor, a grand Georgian estate nestled in the rolling Yorkshire moors. The air carried the heavy scent of blooming roses, tinged with the promise of rain. Inside the manor's dining room, crystal chandeliers gleamed softly, illuminating a gathering of 8 guests around a polished mahogany table. The occasion was a quiet weekend retreat, hosted by Sir Reginald Hawthorne, a retired diplomat known for his impeccable taste and enigmatic smile. Beneath the clink of glasses and polite laughter, however, a faint undercurrent of unease rippled through the room. Captain Arthur Hastings, recently arrived from London, tugged at his tie and surveyed the assembled company. He was no stranger to such gatherings, yet something about this one felt off-kilter, like a painting hung slightly askew. Sir Reginald stood at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the light as he raised a glass of claret. "To friendship, old and new," he declared, his voice warm, but edged with a strain Hastings couldn't quite place. The guests echoed the toast, their smiles varying from genuine to guarded. To Sir Reginald's right sat Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, his wife of 30 years, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room like a hawk. Her silk gown rustled as she leaned to murmur something to her daughter, Clara, a pale young woman of 25, whose nervous fingers toyed with a glass of sherry. Clara's gaze flitted toward the window, as if longing to escape the stifling room. Across from her, Dr. Malcolm Reed, a dour physician with a habit of tapping his pocket watch, sat in silence, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a widowed heiress with a penchant for gossip, chattered brightly to her son, Julian, a handsome but idle artist whose charm seemed to mask a restless edge. Mr. Victor Crane, a solicitor with a perpetually furrowed brow, sipped his wine cautiously, as if expecting it to be poisoned. Miss Diana Forbes, a glamorous actress with a secretive smile, drew eyes with every gesture, her laughter a touch too bright. Finally, Reverend Thomas Gray, a soft-spoken vicar, sat at the table's end, his hands folded, but his eyes darting nervously about. Hastings noted the dynamics, Lady Evelyn's clipped responses to her husband, Clara's avoidance of Julian's gaze, Dr. Reed's subtle flinch when Sir Reginald mentioned old debts in passing. The conversation flowed, politics, theater, the weather. But beneath the civility, tensions simmered. Mrs. Langley's anecdote about a recent scandal was met with strained laughter. Victor Crane's remark about estate law prompted a sharp glance from Sir Reginald. As dessert was served, poached pears and red wine, Sir Reginald stood again. "I trust you'll all enjoy the weekend," he said, his tone oddly formal. "Thornfield has its secrets, but it's a place for truth to emerge." His words hung in the air, and Hastings caught a flicker of unease in Clara's eyes, a tightening of Lady Evelyn's lips. The clock on the mantel struck 6:30, its chimes echoing like a warning. Dinner concluded, the guests dispersed to the drawing-room for coffee or to wander the manor's oak-paneled halls. Hastings lingered, watching Sir Reginald retire to his library to review some papers. The host's parting glance at his wife was heavy with unspoken meaning. Hastings couldn't shake the sense that Thornfield Manor was a stage, its players poised for a drama yet to unfold. He retired to his room, unaware that within hours a scream would shatter the manor's fragile calm, summoning a mind far sharper than his own to unravel its secrets.
Chapter 2. The Crime. Tuesday, 9:45 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor hummed with the soft clatter of coffee cups and the murmur of after-dinner conversation. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the damask wallpaper. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the grand piano, listened half-heartedly as Mrs. Beatrice Langley recounted a London theatre scandal to Miss Diana Forbes, whose laughter rang a touch too shrill. The other guests were scattered. Lady Evelyn had retired early, claiming a headache. Clara Hawthorne sat alone in a corner, sketching in a leather-bound book. Dr. Malcolm Reed stood by the window, tapping his pocket watch. Julian Langley lounged with a cigarette, his eyes restless. Victor Crane pored over a newspaper, and Reverend Thomas Gray murmured platitudes to no one in particular. The air felt heavy, as if the manor itself held its breath. At precisely 9:45 p.m., a piercing scream tore through the house, sharp and raw, echoing from the direction of the library. Hastings leapt to his feet, his coffee cup clattering to the floor. "Good Lord, what was that?" he exclaimed. Julian and Dr. Reed were already moving, with Victor Crane and Miss Forbes close behind. Mrs. Langley gasped, clutching her pearls, while Clara froze, her pencil snapping in her hand. Reverend Gray whispered a prayer as the group hurried down the oak-paneled corridor. The library door stood ajar, a sliver of lamplight spilling into the hall. Hastings pushed it open and stopped dead. Sir Reginald Hawthorne lay slumped over his mahogany desk, his face ashen, eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. A silver letter opener, monogrammed with his initials, protruded from his chest, blood seeping into the green blotting paper beneath him. A glass of brandy had tipped over, its contents pooling beside a half-written note. The room was otherwise pristine, books neatly shelved, curtains drawn, the single window locked tight from the inside. The faint scent of lavender lingered, incongruous against the metallic tang of blood. Dr. Reed knelt beside the body, his fingers probing for a pulse. "He's dead," he said flatly. "No more than 10 minutes, I'd wager." He glanced at his watch, 9:47 p.m. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the quarter hour, its solemn toll underscoring the silence that followed. Hastings, his heart pounding, scanned the scene. The note, scrawled in Sir Reginald's precise hand, read, "My dear, I cannot continue this way." It trailed off, the pen still in its inkwell. A single smudged fingerprint marred the desk's polished edge, and a faint smear of lipstick, barely noticeable, glinted on the rim of the brandy glass. Lady Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed, Clara trembling at her side. "Reginald," she gasped, clutching the doorframe before sinking into a chair. Clara let out a choked sob, her eyes fixed on her father's body. Miss Forbes covered her mouth, while Julian muttered, "This is madness." Victor Crane's brow furrowed deeper, and Reverend Gray began murmuring a prayer, his voice unsteady. Mrs. Langley, hovering at the threshold, whispered, "Who could do such a thing?" Hastings stepped back as Inspector Grant, a local policeman who happened to be staying in a nearby village, was summoned by the butler. A burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, Grant took charge, ordering the room sealed and the guests confined to the drawing room.
"No one leaves until I've questioned you," he barked. His eyes lingered on the letter opener, its ornate handle gleaming accusingly. "Looks personal," he muttered to Hastings. "Someone in this house knew exactly what they were doing." As the guests were herded back, Hastings lingered a moment, his mind racing. The locked window, the undisturbed room, the lavender scent, it all felt staged, like a puzzle missing its key piece. He thought of his old friend, Miss Jane Marple, whose little gray cells thrived on such mysteries. This was no random act, he realized. Someone in Thornfield Manor had planned this murder with chilling precision, and only a mind as sharp as Miss Marple's could unravel the truth hidden in the shadows of that quiet Tuesday night.
Chapter 3. The Arrival.
Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. Wednesday, 2 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The drawing-room of Thornfield Manor was bathed in the muted light of a cloudy afternoon, the heavy velvet curtains framing windows streaked with rain. The guests, summoned by Miss Jane Marple, sat in a tense semicircle on plush armchairs and sofas, their faces a gallery of unease. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, undercut by the faint bitterness of cooling tea. Miss Marple stood before the fireplace, her petite frame commanding the room with quiet authority. Her gray eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from one guest to another, as if reading the lines of a script only she could see. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the door, marveled at how her presence transformed the room into a stage for truth. "Mesdames et messieurs," Miss Marple began, her Belgian accent precise, "a terrible crime has occurred in this house. Sir Reginald Hawthorne is dead, murdered in his library, and the truth lies among you. I wish to understand, each of you, where you were, what you saw, what you heard between 9 and 9:45 last night. Speak plainly, for the smallest detail may unlock this puzzle." Inspector Grant, leaning against a bookcase, snorted softly, but Miss Marple ignored him. She turned first to Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, whose pale face was composed but taut, like a tightly wound spring. "I was in my bedroom," Lady Evelyn said, her voice clipped. "I retired after dinner, around 8:30, with a headache. I heard nothing until the scream." Her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief, betraying a tremor. Clara Hawthorne, seated beside her mother, clutched her sketchbook tightly. "I was in the conservatory, sketching," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I often go there at night. It's quiet. I didn't see anyone." Her eyes flicked to the floor, and Miss Marple noted the slight flush on her cheeks. Dr. Malcolm Reed, his fingers tapping his ever-present pocket watch, spoke next. "I was in the billiard room, alone, practicing shots. I heard the scream and came running." His tone was flat, but his left hand, the one that tapped, hovered protectively over his watch. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, fanning herself with a silk fan, declared she and her son Julian were together in the music room. "We were discussing investments," she said, her voice bright but brittle. "Such a dreadful evening, but we were quite absorbed." Julian nodded, his charming smile strained. "Mother's right. We were there until the scream." Mr. Victor Crane, the solicitor, adjusted his spectacles. "I was in my guest room, writing letters to clients. I heard nothing until the commotion began." His words were measured, but his furrowed brow deepened under Miss Marple's gaze. Miss Diana Forbes tossed her head, her dark curls catching the light. "I was in the garden, clearing my head," she said, her voice smooth but guarded. "The air was stuffy indoors. I came in when I heard the scream." Her fingers brushed a sapphire bracelet, a nervous gesture Miss Marple noted. Reverend Thomas Gray, his hands clasped tightly, spoke last. "I was in the chapel, praying for guidance. The manor felt unsettled. I returned when I heard the cry." His eyes darted to Clara, then away, a flicker Miss Marple stored in her mind. Hastings leaned toward her as the guests fell silent. "They're all so composed," he whispered, "almost too composed." Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Précisément, Hastings. The truth hides in what they do not say, in the tremble of a hand, the avoidance of a glance. They tell me their alibis, but their hearts tell me more." She stepped forward, her gaze lingering on Clara's sketchbook, its pages tightly shut, and on Dr. Reed's watch, its ticking faintly audible in the quiet. "I shall reflect on this," she said aloud, "and tomorrow we shall speak again." As the guests dispersed, some with murmurs of protest, Miss Marple turned to the mantel, where a small porcelain figurine stood slightly askew. She righted it with a gloved finger, her mind already weaving the threads of alibis, gestures, and silences into a pattern only her little gray cells could discern. The riddle of Thornfield Manor was deepening, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel its secrets, one careful question at a time.
Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. Thursday, 9 a.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The morning air in Thornfield Manor was sharp with the scent of damp stone and wood smoke, the moors outside cloaked in a persistent drizzle. The guests, still shaken from the previous day's interrogations, gathered uneasily in the dining room for breakfast, their conversation stilted and sparse. Captain Arthur Hastings, sipping his tea, felt the weight of suspicion hanging over the table like a storm cloud. Miss Jane Marple, however, was absent, having requested a private meeting with Inspector Grant in the Manor's study. Her absence only heightened the tension, as if her sharp eyes were still watching from some unseen corner. At precisely 9:15, Inspector Grant strode into the dining room, his heavy boots thudding on the parquet floor. His face was grim, his notebook clutched tightly. "We've a development," he announced, his voice cutting through the clatter of cutlery. "A gardener, Mr. Wilkins, saw Miss Diana Forbes near the library window at 9:30 p.m. last night, holding a scarf. And this," he held up a silk scarf, its pale blue fabric stained with dark, dried blood. "Found in the hedge just outside the library. Care to explain, Miss Forbes?" The actress's face drained of color, her sapphire bracelet glinting as she gripped the table. "I was in the garden, yes, but I never went near the library," she protested, her voice rising. "That's my scarf, but I lost it yesterday afternoon. I swear I never touched it after that." Her eyes darted to the other guests, seeking support, but found only averted gazes and pursed lips. Mrs. Langley whispered something to Julian, who frowned and looked away. Clara's fingers tightened on her fork, while Lady Evelyn's cold stare fixed on Miss Forbes. Inspector Grant's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that? A witness places you at the scene and your scarf's got blood on it. You'd better come with me for questioning." He gestured toward the door, but before Miss Forbes could rise, Miss Marple appeared, her petite figure framed in the doorway, her expression serene but resolute. "A moment, Inspector," she said, her Belgian accent cutting through the room's tension like a knife. "The scarf is indeed a clue, but not the one you think. Blood can be placed, and scarves can be moved. Let us examine this evidence with care." She approached the table, taking the scarf from Grant with gloved hands. She held it to the light, her magnifying glass gleaming as she studied the fabric. "The blood is dry. Too dry for a crime committed mere hours ago. This stain is older, perhaps from earlier in the day. Someone wished us to find this, to point the finger at Mademoiselle Forbes." Hastings, standing near the sideboard, leaned forward. "You think she's innocent, Miss Marple?" he whispered. Miss Marple's lips twitched. "I think, Hastings, that someone wishes us to believe her guilty. A red herring, as you English say, to distract from the true path." She turned to Miss Forbes, whose eyes were wide with relief and fear. "Tell me, mademoiselle, when did you last see this scarf?" "Yesterday afternoon," Miss Forbes said quickly. "I was walking in the garden after lunch. I set it down on a bench when I went to pick some roses. I forgot it there. I swear I never touched it after that." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze shifting to the other guests. "And who else was in the garden yesterday afternoon?" Silence fell, heavy and accusing. Julian cleared his throat. "I was there briefly, sketching the roses." The Reverend Gray admitted to passing through on his way to the chapel. Dr. Reed, his watch ticking loudly in the quiet, said he'd taken a walk to clear his head. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on each, noting Julian's fidgeting hands, the vicar's flushed cheeks, and Reed's sudden stillness. Inspector Grant scowled. "This is all speculation, Miss Marple. The scarf's evidence, and it points to her." But Miss Marple shook her head. "Evidence, Inspector, must be questioned, not worshipped. This scarf is a lie, meant to mislead. The truth lies elsewhere,
In the library, in the details we have yet to uncover." As Grant grumbled and led Miss Forbes away for further questioning, Miss Marple turned to Hastings. "The killer is clever, mon ami, but not clever enough. They have laid the trap, but I shall lay one of my own." She glanced at the guests, now whispering among themselves, and Hastings saw the glint of determination in her eyes. The scarf was a distraction, but the real clues, the fingerprint, the note, the lavender scent, were still waiting to speak. Miss Marple's little gray cells were already at work, sifting through the red herrings to find the truth buried beneath Thornfield Manor's polished facade.
Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. Thursday, 3 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The library of Thornfield Manor was silent, save for the soft patter of rain against the locked window and the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Miss Jane Marple stood at the center of the room, her magnifying glass catching the dim light as she examined the crime scene with meticulous care. The blood-stained blotting paper, the overturned brandy glass, and the monogrammed letter opener had been left untouched, preserved under Inspector Grant's orders. Captain Arthur Hastings hovered near the door, watching his friend's precise movements, her gray eyes sharp with focus. The air still held a trace of lavender, mingling uneasily with the metallic scent of dried blood. Miss Marple knelt beside the desk, her gloved fingers tracing the smudged fingerprint on its polished edge. "Left-handed," she murmured, her Belgian accent soft but deliberate. "Sir Reginald was right-handed, was he not, Hastings?" Hastings nodded. "Yes, I saw him sign a letter at dinner. Right hand, steady as a rock." "Précisément," Miss Marple said, her lips twitching. "This fingerprint, then, is not his. It belongs to another, someone who touched this desk during or after the crime." She straightened, her gaze falling on the half-written note, "My dear, I cannot continue this way." The ink was fresh, the words trailing off as if interrupted. She tilted her head, noting the pen still in its inkwell, untouched. "Curious," she said. "A man writes a note of such emotion, yet leaves his pen in place. No, something is amiss." She moved to the brandy glass, its contents long since dried into a sticky ring. A faint smear of lipstick clung to the rim, barely visible in the lamplight. Miss Marple leaned closer, her magnifying glass revealing a soft coral shade. "This lipstick," she said, "is not Lady Evelyn's. She wears none. Nor is it Clara's. Her lips are pale. Miss Forbes uses a bolder red, quite distinct. So whose lips touched this glass?" She glanced at Hastings, her eyes gleaming with a question she did not yet voice. Hastings frowned. Could it be a mistake? Someone drinking from the glass earlier? Miss Marple shook her head. "In a murder, Hastings, there are no mistakes, only intentions. This glass was placed here, perhaps to mislead, perhaps to betray." She turned to the fireplace, where a faint wisp of ash caught her eye. Kneeling, she retrieved a burned scrap of paper with tweezers, its edges charred but a few words still legible. Debt and promise. She held it up, her expression thoughtful. "A small detail, mon ami, but the smallest details build the truth. Someone burned this, hoping to hide its secrets, but they were not thorough enough." She rose, pacing the room with measured steps, her mind weaving connections. "The lavender scent," she mused, "is not from a guest's perfume. It is too faint, too specific. It reminds me of the sachets one finds in a drawer, perhaps where papers are kept." She approached a small writing desk in the corner, its drawers locked. With a nod to Hastings, she summoned the butler, who produced a key. Inside the top drawer, nestled among letters, was a sachet of dried lavender, its scent unmistakable. "This desk," Miss Marple said, "was opened recently. See the slight scratch on the lock. Someone was careless." She sifted through the papers, finding nothing but mundane correspondence, yet the sachet intrigued her. Why lavender in a man's library? A touch of sentiment, perhaps, or a clue to another's presence.
Hastings watched, marveling at her precision. "You see things I'd never notice, Miss Marple. But what does it all mean?" She smiled faintly. "It means, Hastings, that the killer is cunning but not invisible. The fingerprint, the lipstick, the burned paper, the lavender are threads in a tapestry. We must follow them carefully, for they lead to the heart of this riddle." She glanced at the door where the murmur of the guests' voices drifted from the drawing-room. "Tonight we observe. Tomorrow we press harder. The truth is here, in this room, waiting for my little gray cells to find it." As they left the library, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the portrait of Sir Reginald above the mantel, his stern eyes seeming to watch her. The clues were small, subtle, but undeniable. A left-handed print, a stranger's lipstick, a burned promise, a whiff of lavender. The puzzle of Thornfield Manor was taking shape, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel it, one meticulous detail at a time.
Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. Friday, 11 a.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The morning light filtered weakly through the tall windows of Thornfield Manor's morning room, casting a pale glow over the assembled guests. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion, the air heavy with the scent of damp wool and strong tea. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair, her posture impeccable, her gray eyes scanning the room like a hawk assessing its prey. The guests, summoned once more, shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, their earlier composure fraying like worn fabric. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near a side table, noted the strain in their faces, eyes that avoided contact, hands that fidgeted, voices that faltered. Miss Marple's relentless questions were peeling back layers of deceit, and the truth was beginning to bleed through. "Mesdames and messieurs," Miss Marple began, her Belgian accent sharp as a blade. "Yesterday we spoke of alibis. Today we speak of motives. Sir Reginald Hawthorne was not killed by a stranger, but by someone in this house, someone with a reason to wish him dead. Let us be honest, for the truth cannot hide forever." Her tone was calm, but it carried an edge that silenced the room. Mrs. Beatrice Langley was the first to crack. Fanning herself nervously, she blurted, "Very well, I'll admit it. Reginald and I argued last week. He'd invested a fortune of mine in some dreadful scheme, and it failed. Thousands gone. I was furious, but I never—" She stopped, her eyes wide, realizing she'd said too much. Julian, her son, shot her a warning glance, but Miss Marple's attention was already fixed on him. "And you, Monsieur Langley, did you share your mother's anger?" Julian's charming smile faltered. He stopped out his cigarette and ran a hand through his hair. "All right, yes," he admitted. "Reginald lent me money, quite a lot actually. He was pressing me to repay it, threatening to cut me off entirely. I begged him to give me time, but he was unyielding." His voice trembled, and he looked away, his fingers twitching. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Mr. Victor Crane, the solicitor, whose furrowed brow seemed etched in stone. "Monsieur Crane, you were Sir Reginald's legal adviser, yes? What can you tell us of his affairs?" Crane adjusted his spectacles, his voice measured but strained. "Sir Reginald was revising his will. He mentioned changes. Clara was to inherit less than expected, and others might have benefited." He hesitated, glancing at Lady Evelyn, who stiffened. "It wasn't finalized, but he was resolute." Lady Evelyn's lips tightened, her handkerchief crumpling in her fist. Miss Marple turned to her. "Madame, you were his wife. Surely you knew of these changes." Lady Evelyn's eyes flashed with defiance,
but her voice cracked. "Our marriage was not what it seemed. Reginald had indiscretions. We argued, yes, but I loved him. I would never harm him." Her words hung heavy, met with skeptical glances from the others. Clara, beside her, clutched her sketchbook, her knuckles white. Miss Marple noted the gesture, her mind cataloguing its significance. Hastings leaned to her as the guests fell silent. "They're all hiding something, aren't they?" he whispered. "We, Hastings," Miss Marple replied softly. "Each has a motive, money, betrayal, pride. But motive alone does not kill. We must find the contradiction, the thread that does not fit." Her gaze drifted to Clara's sketchbook, its pages tightly shut, and then to Dr. Reed, who had remained silent, his left hand still on his watch. "And you, monsieur," she asked suddenly, "what did Sir Reginald hold over you?" Red's face paled, his watch clicking loudly in the quiet. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "We were acquaintances, nothing more." But his eyes betrayed him, darting to the door as if seeking escape. Miss Marple smiled faintly. "We shall see, monsieur. The truth is like a splinter. It works its way to the surface." She dismissed the guests, who dispersed with murmurs of unease. As they left, she approached Clara's chair where the sketchbook lay abandoned. Flipping it open, she found a detailed drawing of the library window dated Tuesday night. "Why sketch a window in the dark?" she mused aloud, her little gray cells humming with possibility. To Hastings she said, "The lies are piling up, mon ami, but they are fragile. The fingerprint, the lipstick, the burned paper, the lavender, they point to a truth hidden in plain sight. Tomorrow we tighten the net." The morning room emptied, but the weight of secrets lingered, and Miss Marple knew the killer's mask was slipping, one lie at a time.
Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. Friday, 8 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The dining room of Thornfield Manor was steeped in the glow of candlelight, the long table set with silver and crystal that gleamed against the somber mood. The rain had stopped, but a damp chill lingered, seeping through the manor's ancient walls. The guests, dressed formally as if clinging to civility, picked at their meal in near silence, the clink of cutlery sounding unnaturally loud. Miss Jane Marple sat at one end, her posture impeccable, her gray eyes observing the strained faces around her. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated to her left, felt the weight of the day's revelations pressing on the group like a tightening vice. The lies uncovered that morning had left everyone on edge, and Miss Marple's quiet presence seemed to amplify their unease. Clara Hawthorne, pale and fidgeting, sat beside her mother, Lady Evelyn, whose icy composure had begun to crack. Across from them, Dr. Malcolm Reed's left hand rested on his watch, its ticking a faint metronome in the quiet. Mrs. Beatrice Langley whispered to her son, Julian, whose forced smile did little to mask his restlessness. Victor Crane, the solicitor, stared at his plate, his brow furrowed, while Miss Diana Forbes, still shaken by the scarf incident, toyed with her wine-glass. Reverend Thomas Gray murmured a grace that no one seemed to hear, his eyes darting nervously toward Clara. As the main course, roast pheasant, was served, Clara suddenly dropped her fork, the clatter shattering the silence. Her hands trembled, and her eyes brimmed with tears. "I can't bear it any more," she cried, her voice raw. "I saw something that night, something I should have said." The room froze, every gaze turning to her. Lady Evelyn gripped her daughter's arm, whispering sharply, "Clara, hush!" But Clara shook her off, her words spilling out like a dam breaking. "It was at the library window," she said, her voice breaking. "A shadow moving away just before the scream. I was in the conservatory sketching, and I saw it through the glass. I didn't tell anyone because Because I was afraid." She clutched a locket at her throat, a small silver oval engraved with her father's initials, her fingers white-knuckled. Miss Marple leaned forward, her expression calm but intent. "Afraid of what, Mademoiselle Clara? The shadow, or what it meant?" Clara's eyes darted to the table, then to Dr. Reed, who had gone rigid. I overheard Father arguing with someone earlier that evening in his study," she admitted. "It was Dr. Reed. They were talking about a debt, an unpaid debt. Father sounded angry, said he wouldn't tolerate it any longer." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't want to believe it meant anything, but after he was killed." Dr. Reed's face darkened, his hand closing over his watch. "That's absurd," he snapped. "Yes, I spoke to Sir Reginald, but it was about a medical matter, nothing more." His voice was sharp, but a bead of sweat glistened at his temple, and Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. "Clara, you foolish girl," Lady Evelyn said, her tone cutting. "You're overwrought. You don't know what you heard." But her words lacked conviction, and Miss Marple noted the way her hand lingered protectively on Clara's shoulder. Hastings leaned toward Miss Marple, whispering, "This changes things, doesn't it, Miss Marple?" Reads in deeper than he let on. Miss Marple nodded almost imperceptibly. "Oui, Hastings. Mademoiselle Clara has given us a piece of the puzzle, though she does not yet see its shape. Fear has loosened her tongue, and fear will loosen others." She turned to Clara, her voice gentle but probing. "This locket, mademoiselle. It is from your father, yes? You hold it tightly. Why?" Clara's fingers tightened around the locket, her eyes welling again. "He gave it to me last month. He said it was a reminder of his love, no matter what happened. I didn't understand then." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. The other guests exchanged uneasy glances. Julian stubbed out his cigarette, his jaw tight. Mrs. Langley fanned herself furiously, while Miss Diana Forbes' bracelet jingled as she reached for her wineglass. Victor Crane cleared his throat as if to speak, but thought better of it. Reverend Thomas Gray murmured, "The truth will set us free," but his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple arose, her small frame commanding the room's attention. "Thank you, Mademoiselle Clara. You have been brave. The shadow you saw, the words you heard, they are threads in our tapestry. Tomorrow we shall weave them further." She excused herself, leaving the guests in a stunned silence, the weight of Clara's revelation hanging heavy. As they stepped into the hall, Hastings whispered, "Reed's looking guiltier by the minute, Miss Marple. That debt, the shadow, do you think it's him?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Oui, Hastings. The heart betrays, but the mind must confirm. Clara's locket, Reed's watch, the shadow at the window, these are not yet the whole truth, but they point the way. The killer is close, mon ami, and their mask is slipping." Her gray cells were already at work, piecing together the emotional cracks and hidden lies that would soon unravel the riddle of Thornfield Manor.
Chapter 9. The Trap. Saturday, 7 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The library of Thornfield Manor was lit by the soft glow of oil lamps, their flickering light casting long shadows across the oak-paneled walls. The guests, summoned by Miss Jane Marple, stood or sat in a tense circle, their faces etched with apprehension. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and the faint, lingering trace of lavender, a reminder of the crime that had shattered the manor's calm. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, his heart pounding as he watched Miss Marple take her place at the center of the room, her petite figure radiating quiet authority. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7, its tolls echoing like a prelude to judgment. Miss Marple's gray eyes swept over the group, Lady Evelyn rigid with defiance, Clara clutching her locket, Dr. Malcolm Reed, his left hand hovering over his watch, Mrs. Beatrice Langley fanning herself nervously, Julian, his cigarette unlit, Victor Crane, his brow furrowed, Miss Diana Forbes, her sapphire bracelet glinting, and Reverend Thomas Gray, his hands clasped tightly. Inspector Grant leaned against the desk, arms crossed, his skepticism barely concealed. "Mesdames et messieurs," Miss Marple began, her Belgian accent sharp and deliberate, "the time has come to unravel the riddle of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's death. A murder so precise, so personal, could not be the work of chance. The truth lies among you, hidden in your words, your gestures, your lies. Tonight, I shall lay a trap to reveal it." She paced slowly, her gloved hands clasped behind her. "Let us consider a new clue," she said, her voice calm but commanding. "A pen, engraved with Sir Reginald's initials, was found this morning in the garden, near the library window. It was not in the inkwell where it should have been, nor was it on the desk with the half-written note. How did it come to be outside?" A ripple of unease passed through the room. Julian paled, his cigarette slipping from his fingers. Mrs. Langley's fan froze mid-motion. Dr. Reed's hand tightened on his watch, the ticking suddenly loud. Clara's eyes widened, and Lady Evelyn's lips parted in a silent gasp. Victor Crane adjusted his spectacles, his frown deepening, while Miss Forbes and Reverend Grey exchanged furtive glances. Miss Marple stopped pacing, her gaze piercing. "You react, all of you, as if this pen means something, and yet—" She paused, her lips twitching into a faint smile. "There is no pen. I invented it to test you. Your faces betray you, for the guilty cannot hide their fear." Dr. Reed stood abruptly, his voice sharp. "This is outrageous. You accuse us with tricks?" But his left hand trembled, and Miss Marple's eyes locked onto him. "Sit, doctor," she said softly, her tone steel beneath velvet. "The pen was a fiction, but your reaction is truth. Let us speak of real clues. A left-handed fingerprint on the desk, a glass with coral lipstick, a burned letter about a debt, a shadow at the window. These are the threads of our tapestry, and they point to one among you." She turned to the group, her voice rising slightly. "Sir Reginald Hawthorne was killed not for love or hate, but for control. The letter opener, his own, was a symbol of his power, used against him with cold precision. Someone in this room planned this murder, planted Miss Forbes' scarf to mislead, and left traces they could not erase." Clara stifled a sob, her locket gleaming in the lamplight. Julian lit his cigarette, his hands unsteady. Mrs. Langley whispered, "This is unbearable." Lady Evelyn's eyes burned with defiance, while Victor Crane shifted uncomfortably. Miss Forbes clutched her bracelet, and Reverend Grey's lips moved in silent prayer. Miss Marple stepped closer to the desk, her finger pointing to the blood-stained blotting paper. "The killer made one fatal mistake," she said. "They believed they could outwit the truth. But the truth, mes amis, is relentless. It lies in the details, the lavender sachet, the smudged print, the words left unburned. And it lies in the heart of the one who cannot meet my eyes." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing on every soul. Hastings, his pulse racing, saw the guests' faces, some defiant, some fearful, one unmistakably guilty. Miss Marple's trap had been set, and the killer's mask was slipping. The stage was ready for the final revelation, and her little gray cells were poised to expose the truth that had haunted Thornfield Manor since that fateful Tuesday night.
Chapter 10. The Reveal. Saturday, 8 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The library of Thornfield Manor was a crucible of tension, the air thick with anticipation as Miss Jane Marple stood before the assembled guests, her petite frame a beacon of calm authority. The oil lamps cast flickering shadows across the oak-panelled walls, illuminating the blood-stained blotting paper, the overturned brandy glass, and the monogrammed letter opener on the desk, silent witnesses to the crime. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the fireplace, felt his heart race as Miss Marple's grey eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the circle of suspects. Lady Evelyn, her face a mask of defiance, Clara, clutching her locket, Dr. Malcolm Reed, his left hand frozen on his watch, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her fan stilled, Julian, his cigarette smouldering, Victor Crane, brow furrowed, Miss Diana Forbes, her bracelet glinting, and Reverend Thomas Gray, his hands trembling. Inspector Grant, arms crossed, watched with grudging curiosity. "Madame et Monsieur," Miss Marple began, her Belgian accent cutting through the silence like a blade, "the riddle of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's death is solved. The truth has emerged, as it always does, from the threads of lies, clues, and contradictions woven in this room. Tonight I shall reveal the killer." She paced slowly, her gloved hands clasped. Sir Reginald was murdered not for love or money alone, but for control. Control over a secret that threatened ruin. The letter opener, his own, monogrammed with his initials, was no random weapon. It was chosen to silence him, to reclaim power from a man who held too much. She pointed to the desk. "Let us begin with the clues. The fingerprint, left-handed, on a desk Sir Reginald, a right-handed man, would not smudge. The brandy glass, bearing coral lipstick, not worn by Lady Evelyn, Clara, or Miss Forbes. The half-written note, 'My dear, I cannot continue this way.' Interrupted, yet the pen remained in its inkwell. The burnt letter fragment with words 'debt' and 'promise'. The lavender scent traced to a sachet in a locked drawer. And Clara's shadow at the library window, seen at 9:35 p.m. The guests shifted uneasily. Dr. Reed's watch ticked loudly, and Miss Marple's gaze settled on him. "Dr. Reed, you are at the heart of this tapestry. Let us reconstruct the truth." She turned to the group. "At 9 p.m., Sir Reginald was alive, dining with you all. By 9:30, he was in the library, writing his note. At 9:35, Clara saw a shadow, your shadow, Doctor, leaving the library. You had just killed Sir Reginald, stabbing him with his own letter opener. But why?" Miss Marple's voice grew firm. "You owed Sir Reginald a substantial debt, amassed through gambling, a secret he threatened to expose. Clara overheard your argument that evening, his refusal to extend more funds. You could not allow his threat to ruin you. So you planned his murder, using the letter opener to make it seem personal, impulsive." She gestured to the scarf, now on the desk. "You stole Miss Forbes's scarf from the garden bench that afternoon, stained it with blood, perhaps from a cut you sustained earlier, and planted it in the hedge to frame her. The lipstick on the glass? You applied it, using cosmetics stolen from Miss Forbes's room, knowing her bold red shade would mislead. The burnt letter fragment was yours, a note promising repayment you could not honor. You burned it, but not thoroughly enough." Dr. Reed stood, his face ashen. "This is nonsense. You've no proof." His left hand gripped his watch, its engraved face catching the light. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Your watch, Doctor, betrays you. It bears Sir Reginald's initials. A gift, you claimed, but stolen from his desk during the murder. The left-handed fingerprint matches your dominant hand. And the lavender? You opened the locked drawer, searching for the death note, disturbing the sachet. You thought you were clever, but you left too many threads. Reed's composure crumbled. I had no choice, he stammered, collapsing into his chair. He was going to ruin me, my practice, my life. His confession spilled out, raw and desperate, as Inspector Grant stepped forward, handcuffs ready. The room was silent, the guests stunned. Clara sobbed softly, her locket clutched tightly. Lady Evelyn's face softened, a flicker of relief in her eyes. Miss Forbes exhaled, her bracelet still. Julian stubbed out his cigarette, and Mrs. Langley's fan fell to her lap. Miss Marple stepped back, her expression serene. The truth, mes amis, is a mirror. It reflects what we wish to hide. Dr. Reed's heart betrayed him, and my little grey cells merely lit the way. As Grant led Reed away, the library seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare at last.
Chapter 11. The Reflection. Sunday, 9 a.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale light across Thornfield Manor's dew-kissed lawns. The moors stretched endlessly beyond, their wild beauty a stark contrast to the somber mood within the estate. The guests, subdued and weary, had begun to disperse, their bags packed as the shadow of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's murder lifted with Dr. Malcolm Reed's confession. The manor's grand hall felt emptier now, its oak-paneled walls echoing with the ghosts of secrets unveiled. Miss Jane Marple stood on the front steps, her grey coat buttoned against the morning chill, her hat neatly pinned. Captain Arthur Hastings joined her, his suitcase at his side, his face a mix of relief and awe. The air was crisp, scented with wet grass and the faint sweetness of roses. Miss Marple's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, her expression serene yet tinged with melancholy. It is done, Hastings. The riddle is solved, the truth revealed. Yet there is always a sadness in such matters, n'est-ce pas? A life lost, a heart broken. Hastings nodded, adjusting his hat. I don't know how you did it, Miss Marple. The fingerprint, the lipstick, that watch. It all seemed so tangled, but you saw the pattern clear as day. How do you always know where to look? She smiled faintly, her gaze distant. The human heart, mon ami, is a map. It betrays itself in the smallest ways. A glance, a tremor, a lie too carefully told. My little grey cells, they do not create the truth. They merely follow the paths others leave behind. Dr. Reed's fear, his desperation, his need for control, they were written in every choice he made. Hastings glanced back at the manor, where Lady Evelyn and Clara stood in the doorway, their faces softened by gratitude and grief. Poor Clara, he said. She's lost her father, and now this. Do you think she'll be all right? Miss Marple's eyes softened. She is young, Hastings, and the young are resilient. Her locket, her sketches, they are her anchor. With time, she will find peace. As for Lady Evelyn, she carries her own burdens, but she is strong. They will endure. The other guests emerged, their farewells brief and subdued. Miss Diana Forbes, her sapphire bracelet catching the light, offered Miss Marple a quiet nod of thanks. Mrs. Beatrice Langley and Julian murmured their goodbyes, their relief palpable. Victor Crane, his brow still furrowed, shook Hastings' hand stiffly. Reverend Thomas Gray paused to bless Miss Marple, his voice trembling with gratitude. "You have brought light to a dark place," he said. Miss Marple inclined her head. "I have only done what order and method demand, Reverend. The truth belongs to no one. It simply is." A black car pulled up, its engine humming softly. As Miss Marple moved toward it, Hastings followed, still marveling. "What's next for you, Miss Marple? Another puzzle? Another manor?" She paused, her hand on the car door. The world, Hastings, is full of puzzles. Wherever there is disorder, my little gray cells will find a purpose. But for now, I return to my friend in York, perhaps for a quiet cup of tea." Her eyes twinkled, a hint of mischief breaking through her calm. Hastings chuckled. "Quiet? With you, Miss Marple, I doubt it." She stepped into the car, her smile lingering. "Au revoir, mon ami. Keep your eyes open. The next riddle is never far." The car pulled away, its wheels crunching on the gravel, carrying Miss Jean Marple from Thornfield Manor and its secrets. Hastings watched until it vanished into the moors, knowing that wherever she went, her little gray cells would light the way, unraveling the truths hidden in the shadows of the human heart.
Chapter 12. The Epilogue. Sunday, 3 p.m., Thornfield Manor, Yorkshire. The afternoon sun hung low over the Yorkshire moors, bathing Thornfield Manor in a golden glow that softened its stern Georgian facade. The estate, now quiet after the tumult of the past days, seemed to exhale, its secrets laid bare by Miss Jane Marple's unrelenting logic. The guests had departed, their cars leaving faint tracks in the gravel drive, and the manor felt both emptier and lighter, as if cleansed by the truth. Captain Arthur Hastings lingered in the drawing-room, his suitcase packed, but his mind still tethered to the events of the week. He stood by the window, gazing at the rose garden where the drama had begun, reflecting on the puzzle that had unraveled before his eyes. The door creaked open, and Clara Hawthorne entered, her face pale but composed, her locket gleaming softly at her throat. She carried her sketchbook, its pages worn from constant use. "Captain Hastings," she said, her voice steady but quiet, "I wanted to thank you, and Miss Marple, before you leave. Without her, I don't know if we'd have ever known the truth." Hastings smiled warmly. "Miss Marple has a way of finding what's hidden, Miss Hawthorne, but you helped, you know. Your courage in speaking about that shadow, that argument, it was a vital piece." Clara's eyes glistened, and she touched her locket. "Father gave me this to remind me of his love. I thought I'd failed him by staying silent, but Miss Marple, she saw what I couldn't." She opened her sketchbook, revealing a new drawing, a delicate sketch of the manor's front steps where Miss Marple had stood that morning. "I drew this to remember her," she said. "She's so small, but so extraordinary." Hastings nodded, struck by the accuracy of the sketch, down to the tilt of Miss Marple's hat. "She is that," he said. "Her little gray cells, as she calls them, see what the rest of us miss." Lady Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her silk scarf draped elegantly despite the strain in her eyes. "Captain," she said, her tone formal but softened, "I owe you and your friend a debt. This house was a cage of secrets, Reginald's, mine, everyone's. Miss Marple's set us free in a way." Pause, glancing at Clara. "We'll sell Thornfield, I think. Start anew, somewhere without shadows." Hastings bowed slightly. "A wise choice, Lady Evelyn. A fresh start can heal many wounds." As mother and daughter left to oversee the staff, Hastings took a final walk through the manor's halls, pausing at the library door. The room was tidy now, the blood-stained blotting paper removed, the letter opener and brandy glass taken as evidence. Yet the air still held a faint trace of lavender, a reminder of the clues that had guided Miss Marple to the truth. He thought of Dr. Reed, now in custody, his confession a stark unraveling of a man undone by desperation. The watch, the lipstick, the burned letter, they had all been threads in Miss Marple's tapestry, woven with precision to expose a killer. Outside, the butler signaled that Hastings' car had arrived. He stepped onto the gravel drive, the mowers stretching vast and wild before him. The memory of Miss Marple's serene departure lingered, her calm assurance, her twinkling eyes, her promise that the next riddle was never far off.
He wondered where she was now, perhaps sipping tea in York, her mind already turning to some new puzzle. As the car pulled away, Hastings looked back at Thornfield Manor, its windows glinting in the fading light. The Tuesday night riddle was solved, its darkness dispelled by a mind as sharp as it was unassuming. Miss Marple had shone, as always, and Hastings knew the world was a little brighter for it, until the next shadow fell and her little gray cells were called upon again.